Welcome to another episode of the Ginger ROAMance. Here, you'll hear anonymous stories from travellers all over the world. Real submissions from real people. Tales of connection, romance, passion, heartbreak, friendship, and love in all its forms. Because every kind of love deserves to be told.
This week's episode is called The Week We Borrowed Names, from Tbilisi, Georgia. I met her because of a mistake that wasn't mine, or at least not initially. It was my third evening in Tbilisi, and the city still felt like a language I couldn't quite pronounce. The streets curved in ways that defied intention. Balconies leaned like conspirators, and everything smelled faintly of wine, smoke, and something ancient, like stone that had remembered too much. I had booked a table at a restaurant I couldn't pronounce, chosen only because someone on the internet called it Unforgettable. When I arrived, the host didn't ask my name. He simply nodded, as if I'd been expected all along, and led me through a narrow corridor into a room that glowed amber with candlelight. And there she was, already seated, already waiting. She looked up as I approached, her expression not surprised, not confused, just quietly certain. "You're late," she said. I laughed, assuming this was some charming cultural misalignment. I think there's been a mix-up. But she tilted her head slightly, studying me with an almost scholarly curiosity. "Maybe," she said, "but you still look like you were meant to be here." I should have corrected it then, clarified, found the host, fixed the situation. Instead, I sat down. Because something in her tone didn't accuse, it invited. And something in me, something that had grown tired of being known in predictable ways, wanted to see what would happen if I didn't explain myself. "What's my name?" I asked. She smiled, slow and deliberate, like she had been waiting for that exact question. "Tonight," she said, "you can choose." We never exchanged our real names. Not that night, not the next morning when we woke up in a hotel room neither of us had technically booked. Not even by the third day, when the city began to feel like a shared hallucination we had stepped into together. Instead, we borrowed. She called me Mara, a name that felt sharp and luminous in my mouth. I called her Elio because it sounded like sunlight slipping through fingers. We became those people, or perhaps we allowed them to emerge. With Mara, I wasn't cautious. I wasn't the version of myself that weighed every word, that anticipated endings before beginnings had even settled. Mara was reckless in the most elegant way. She didn't rush, she simply didn't hesitate. And Elio? God, Elio was made of contradictions. She spoke like someone who had read too much and trusted too little. Her sentences often started in one place and ended somewhere entirely different, like she was discovering her own thoughts in real time. She smoked thin cigarettes she didn't seem to enjoy, drank wine like it was a ritual rather than a pleasure, and touched me like she was memorizing something she knew she would forget. We spent 7 days like that. 7 days untethered from our real lives. In the mornings, we walked the city before it fully woke. Tbilisi at dawn felt like a secret. Empty streets, stray cats watching from rooftops, the quiet hum of something just beneath the surface. She would take my hand without looking at me, as if it were an unconscious reflex. "Tell me something untrue about you," she said once, as we crossed a bridge that seemed to exist purely for the purpose of crossing. I thought about it. "I've never been in love," I said. She nodded, accepting it without question. Then, after a pause, she said, "I have." but the way she said it made it feel like a lie. Afternoons were slower. We would sit in cafés that felt older than the idea of time itself, drinking coffee so strong it bordered on confrontational. She liked to watch people, not in a casual way, but with an intensity that made me wonder what she was searching for. "Everyone is pretending to be someone," she said once. "Most people just don't admit it." "And we are?" I asked. She turned to me then, her gaze softening in a way I hadn't seen before. "We're just better at it." By the fourth day, the illusion had deepened into something that felt almost dangerous. Not because it was unstable, but because it was too easy, too seamless. We didn't ask about the lives waiting for us beyond the edges of that week. No pasts, no futures, just a suspended present that felt like it had no obligation to become anything more. But there were moments, small fractures in the surface, where something real threatened to break through. Like the night it rained. Not gently, but with a kind of insistence that demanded to be acknowledged. We had been walking without direction, letting the streets choose us, when the sky opened. We ran, laughing at first, until we found shelter beneath a narrow overhang that barely protected us. She was soaked, hair clinging to her face, clothes heavy with water, eyes brighter than I have ever seen them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. And then she said quietly, "What happens when this ends?" It was the first time either of us had acknowledged that it would. I should have answered honestly, should have said something grounded, something real. Instead, I stepped closer, brushing the rain from her cheek. "It doesn't," I said. She held my gaze for a long time, searching for something I wasn't offering. Then she nodded. "Okay," she said. But something shifted after that. Not dramatically, not in a way that could be named. Just a subtle reorientation, like a compass adjusting to a truth it couldn't ignore. On the 7th day, we woke up before the sun. There was no discussion about why. We both knew. The room felt different, smaller somehow. Or perhaps it was just the edges of our borrowed world were becoming visible. She was already awake when I opened my eyes, sitting by the window, watching the sky lighten. "Do you ever feel like you're just passing through your own life?" she asked, without turning around. "Yes," I said. She nodded as if it confirmed something. "I think I wanted to stop," she said, "just for a moment." I sat up, the weight of the week settling into something heavier. "And did you?" I asked. She turned then, her expression softer than I had ever seen it. "For a while," she said. "With you." We didn't drag it out. There was no dramatic goodbye, no attempt to anchor something that had only ever been meant to float. We dressed slowly, deliberately, as if prolonging the act itself could stretch time. At the door, she paused. "What's your real name?" she asked. It felt like a rupture, like breaking the spell. I hesitated, because Mara wasn't just a name. It was a version of myself I wasn't sure I knew how to be outside of her. And maybe she saw that, because she smiled, gently this time. "It's okay," she said. "You can keep it." I swallowed, the weight of something unspoken pressed against my chest. "And you?" I asked. "Is Elio?" She shook her head. "No," she said, "but she's real enough." We left the hotel together, walking in the same direction until the street demanded we choose otherwise. There was no countdown, no final moment, just a natural divergence. She stopped first. I took another step before realizing she wasn't beside me anymore. When I turned, she was already a few meters away. Not close enough to touch, not far enough to forget. She raised her hand. Not quite a wave, not quite a goodbye. And then she said something I didn't expect. "Don't go back to who you were," she said. And then she turned and walked away. Sometimes we still message, briefly, sporadically, never enough to reconstruct what we had. She signs her messages with different names now, and I do the same. We never acknowledge it. We never talk about that week directly. But occasionally she'll ask me something strange like, "Are you still pretending?" And I'll reply, "Less than before." I don't know who she really was, not fully, but I know this. For 7 days in a city that felt like a dream, I met a version of myself I had never allowed to exist. And she saw her, not as something temporary, but as something possible. And maybe that's what made it so hard to let go. Not her, but the person I became when I was with her. Or perhaps the person I finally allowed myself to be.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you're following along to keep up to date with weekly stories that will inspire, entertain, and maybe even make you fall in love with the idea of love itself. Got your own romance story and want to be a part of the Ginger Romance community? Check the notes for details on how to submit your own.